They called 911 to remove me, not knowing the lake was legally mine for 100 years. When the HOA called 911 to remove me from my own lake home, I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea just how deep their plan ran. One quiet Montana afternoon turned into a full-blown standoff on my dock, and every choice I made after that pushed me closer to the truth they never wanted me to find. Stick with me and you'll see exactly how their power unraveled the moment I opened the right piece of paper. And hey, if you want more real stories about fighting back the right way, hit subscribe and stay with me by the water. I heard the cruiser before I saw it. Those slow, deliberate tires grinding over gravel, the sound cutting through the quiet Montana afternoon like a blade. Out on my porch, the lake was its usual self, calm, silver blue, barely rippled by the wind drifting down from the pines. But the peace ended the moment Deputy Cole Maddox's patrol SUV slid sideways across my driveway, blocking the only exit like he was preparing for a standoff. For a second, I just stood there with my coffee cooling in my hand, trying to make sense of the scene. His engine idled hard, lights flashing but the siren off, the red and blue strobe pulsing against the wooden posts of my father's old dock. Beyond him, framed in the dust cloud his tires had kicked up, stood Marcy Thornwell in her spotless white SUV, pearlescent paint, polished chrome, and a smirk sharp enough to cut rope. She didn't get out at first. She just watched. One manicured hand tapped her window like she was impatient for the show to start. Deputy Maddox stepped out, boots crunching, one hand resting near his holster, though he didn't grip it. "Afternoon, Evan," he said, but his voice carried the stiffness of someone acting under orders. Bad ones. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my mug on the porch rail. He adjusted his belt. "We received a report of a trespasser on HOA-controlled property." I blinked at him. "Trespasser? On my land?" That was Marcy's cue. She slid out of her SUV like she was stepping onto a stage, smoothing down the front of her HOA blue blazer. Her hair was ironed into a helmet of blonde perfection, not a strand out of place despite the breeze rolling off the lake. She carried a clipboard, of course, and strutted toward us like she was sheriff, judge, and executioner all in one. "Deputy," she said sweetly, "that's the man I told you about. He's occupying shoreline property that falls under Lakeshore HOA jurisdiction. He's been warned." Behind her, I noticed neighbors trickling in like spectators at a parade, holding phones up, whispering, angling for the best angle. Always the same handful. The couple from Aspen Loop who reported people for leaving Christmas lights up too long. The retired dentist who thought every bark of a dog was a public threat. And the trio of HOA loyalists who'd follow Marcy into a wildfire if she said it was regulation compliant. "Ma'am," I said, "this is my home." She let out a little laugh, the condescending kind she used on people she thought were uneducated or inconvenient. "Mr. Calder, we've discussed this. Your so-called lake home sits on a controlled shoreline easement. You do not have the right to occupy it without HOA authorization." She tilted her head. "And you refused our compliance review." My jaw locked. I'd been at this place since I was 8. My father had built half the beams with his own hands. My grandfather had cleared the shoreline himself with a borrowed tractor. I knew every board in that dock better than I knew most of the people in this county. Still, I kept my voice level. "I didn't refuse anything. I said I'd need to read the paperwork you shoved at me yesterday." Deputy Maddox cleared his throat. "Evan, I'm going to need to see your ID and any documentation showing ownership or lease rights." The humiliation hit hot, like stepping too close to a bonfire. The crowd leaned in. Phones rose even higher. Someone whispered, "He's done for." I reached into the drawer near the porch door, the one where Dad used to keep extra nails and old fishing tackle, and pulled out my wallet. Maddox checked my ID like he didn't already know me by first name. We'd sat at the same church picnic last August, for God's sake. All right, he said softly, almost apologetic. Do you have anything proving the structure belongs to you? Before I could answer, Marcy clicked her tongue. Deputy, this is really simple. The HOA bylaws, updated last quarter, state that any unapproved occupant may be removed by law enforcement. He's trespassing on common HOA land. Remove him. Ma'am, I didn't say— Remove him, she repeated, louder, planting her heels on my gravel like she owned it. I stared at her, at Deputy Maddox, at the neighbors recording my embarrassment. A slow burn curled through my chest. Not panic, not even anger yet. Just a steady awareness that something here was wrong. Deeply wrong. I stepped forward, calm as the lake behind me. Deputy, why is the HOA claiming they own my lakefront house? Maddox hesitated, looking between us. The hesitation told me everything. Something was about to break open, and it wasn't going to be me. By the next morning, the entire valley seemed to be holding its breath. Fog hung low over the lake, drifting like pale smoke across the water. The gravel on my driveway was still grooved from where the deputy's cruiser had blocked it hours earlier. I hadn't slept much. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to loons calling out in the gray dawn, trying to make sense of how the HOA had convinced law enforcement that my home wasn't mine. The crunch of tires snapped me out of it. Marcy Thornwell's white SUV came gliding down the road like a glacier, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. She parked in the exact same spot Maddox had blocked yesterday, stepped out, and marched toward me with a confidence that bordered on delusion. In her hands was a binder, thick, laminated, color-tabbed, the kind of binder someone spent hours preparing for a war only they believed they were winning. "Good morning, Mr. Calder," she said, icy but cheerful. Her heels sank slightly into the soft ground, but her posture stayed rigid, chin lifted like she was looking down over a courtroom bench. "Since you weren't cooperative yesterday, I thought it best to deliver the updated regulations in person." She shoved the binder into my hands before I could answer. The weight nearly startled me. It felt less like a rulebook and more like a loaded weapon. Lakeshore HOA Rules and Lakefront Compliance Mandates. Revision 14.2, she announced proudly. Everything you need to understand why your occupation of the shoreline is unauthorized is inside. I flipped it open. The first page was a glossy photo of the lake, my lake, labeled Common HOA Resource. The next pages were littered with highlighted text and arrows pointing at alleged violations. Illegal dock length, unauthorized watercraft, improper fencing, unpermitted storage structure, unsafe shoreline grade. Some pages were so absurd I almost laughed. Unauthorized porch furniture? I read aloud. Your rocking chair is not in compliance, she said flatly. Natural wood finish disrupts the uniform aesthetic of the lakefront residences. It's a porch chair, I said. On my porch. She smiled like I'd proven her point. And the porch sits on controlled shoreline. You are welcome to apply for an exception through the Architectural Harmony Committee. They meet quarterly. Marcy, this is ridiculous. Mr. Calder, she snapped. Your property was grandfathered incorrectly years ago. The HOA bylaws were updated recently to address such oversights. You're now under full HOA authority. The wind picked up, sending ripples across the lake and brushing pine needles against the dock. Cold air bit my fingers as I held the binder. I wasn't angry yet, just numb. Numb and increasingly suspicious. This house has been here since the 1950s, I said. My dad lived here before the HOA existed. Yes, she said sharply. And your father never had the proper approvals for lakefront compliance. We chose not to pursue enforcement during his later years. She said it like my father's illness was an inconvenience. But now that ownership has transferred to you, we will be correcting decades of non-compliance. A thin film of frost had settled on the railing beside me, glittering like shards of broken glass. For a second, I imagined slamming the binder shut so hard the frost would jump. Instead, I breathed in slow. "What do you want, Marcy?" I asked. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. A flicker, something sharp and hungry. "We want this shoreline managed properly, and that begins with removing unapproved structures and reassigning the area for community use." I stared at her. "You're trying to take my home." "Your structure is improperly situated on HOA land," she corrected. Her voice clipped, almost rehearsed. "You may remain on the property as long as you're compliant, but you cannot occupy what you do not own." That was the moment something clicked. The binder, the aggression, the sudden enforcement after years of nothing. This wasn't about compliance. It was about possession. "You seem pretty determined to get me off this land," I said, letting the words settle in the cold morning air. She pressed her lips into a thin smile. "Determination is simply following protocol." "No," I said quietly. "It's something else. You're hiding something." Marcy paused. A tiny pause, but enough. She recovered quickly, flipping her hair back over one shoulder. "That binder contains everything you need to know, Mr. Calder. Ignorance of compliance will not protect you from enforcement." She turned sharply, heels crunching on the frost-hardened gravel, and walked back to her SUV. Before climbing in, she looked over her shoulder at me. "You have 7 days to address the violations. After that, the HOA will proceed with formal action." The SUV door shut with a heavy thud. The engine rumbled. She backed out, dust lifting around her tires like smoke rising from a brush fire. I watched her disappear down the road, the binder still weighing down my hands, the morning sun finally burning through the fog and lighting up the edges of the old dock below. 7 days. Dozens of violations. And a woman who was too invested in my removal to be acting out of a normal HOA agenda. Something deeper was brewing, and whatever it was, she didn't want me to find it. By the second sunrise after Marcy delivered her monstrous binder, the lake looked different, not in water or color, but in feeling. Like it knew something was shifting along its edge. Mist clung low across the surface, swirling between the dock posts, as if the lake itself was whispering a warning. I stood outside with a fresh mug of coffee, hands wrapped around the warm ceramic, watching the fog lift in slow drifts. That's when I heard the first hammer of metal stakes. At the far end of my shoreline, a man in a neon vest was driving survey flags into the ground like he was trying to stake a claim. Another man followed behind him, snapping photos with a device that beeped every few seconds. Both ignored me completely. No greeting, no explanation, no permission asked. I set my coffee down and walked toward them, boots crunching on frozen pine needles. "Morning, fellas," I said, forcing civility. "Can I help you with something?" The man with the camera didn't look up. "HOA survey," he muttered around a toothpick. "Per order." "This is private property," I said. "You can't just show up and talk to the HOA," he interrupted, waving a piece of paper without stopping his beeping, snapping routine. "We're just here to mark the violations." The other guy hammered another stake so close to my boathouse, I could feel the vibration through the planks. The boathouse, my father's pride, stood dark from age but strong, the wood beams cured by decades of lake wind. Seeing strangers marking it like it was condemned stirred something tight in my chest. "What violations?" I asked sharply. "Shoreline grade, dock extension, tree hazards, unapproved fencing," he rattled off, pointing his hammer at each like a prosecutor outlining charges. "Standard stuff for non-compliant properties." Non-compliant. They said it like a curse. "We'll be done by noon," the toothpick man said. "We've got 3 more problem houses today." Problem houses. That's what they called the homes that didn't fit Marcy's vision of control. I watched them continue, powerless for the moment, anger simmering under my ribs. I took out my phone and filmed everything. Every stake, every photo, every trespass. When they finally left, the shoreline looked like a battlefield of thin orange flags stabbing out of the earth. A cold wind blew in from the north, rattling them so they whispered like warnings. By midday, the harassment ramped up. My mailbox clanged open as someone shoved in a thick wad of papers. Violation slips, all identical, printed in bold red letters. The pile was so heavy it forced the mailbox door to stay ajar, fluttering like a wounded bird. Unsafe vegetation. Visible watercraft, non-compliant porch fixture, unapproved exterior appearance, unauthorized occupation. The last one made my breath hitch. Unauthorized occupation. I was being written out of my own property by paperwork. As I sifted through the stack, I heard voices drifting down the road. A pair of neighbors were walking their dog, talking low, but not low enough. "That's him," one whispered. "The guy refusing the HOA. Heard he cussed out the president. Heard he threatened her. Heard the sheriff almost arrested him." Rumors travel faster than wind in these parts, and Marcy knew exactly how to weaponize them. This wasn't accidental. This was a campaign. I raised a hand in greeting, but their conversation tapered off, and they continued past without returning the gesture. The dog, a golden retriever who used to bolt over for belly rubs, didn't even look my way. Isolation has a sound, and I was hearing it. By late afternoon, the air had warmed enough to melt the thin frost off the dock, leaving the boards slick and smelling of damp pine. I walked down to check on the trees the survey crew had marked. 5 of them, great big lodgepole pines, had orange circles around their trunks, numbers scrawled beneath. "Remove safety hazard." They were older than me, older than my father. Trees with roots deeper than any HOA charter. I knelt near one, ran my hand along its rough bark, and felt anger spark clean and hot. This wasn't about safety. This was intimidation dressed up as regulation. That's when I heard the crunch of tires again. I turned to see a pickup truck pull up, old, dented, driven by a man I'd seen once or twice around the valley but didn't know well. He was one of those quiet living types, beard thick, jacket patched from years of hard winters. "You, Evan?" he called, stepping out. "Yeah." He looked around at the flags, the violation slips crumpled in my fist, the marked trees. He shook his head slowly. "They did this to my daughter when she bought that place on Cedar Bend. HOA bled her dry till she sold." I swallowed. "Why?" He hesitated. "Because her lot backed the shoreline. Good land. Flat land. Prime real estate." Something twisted in my gut. "You saying they forced her out?" He shrugged, a helpless, bitter motion. "They'll find something wrong with your door hinges if they want you gone bad enough." He got back in his truck without another word. Left me standing there between the marked trees and the flag-littered ground, the lake reflecting a long stripe of dying sunlight behind me. As dusk settled, I returned to the porch, binder in hand, trying to piece together what Marcy's real endgame was. The lake wind brushed cold across my jaw, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine smoke. A storm cloud was building behind the ridge, darkening the sky with a heavy, waiting stillness. Something was wrong, far beyond HOA rules. And as the first crack of thunder rolled across the lake, the truth settled over me like a weight. Marcy Thornwell wasn't enforcing regulations. She was clearing ground, preparing something she didn't want me anywhere near. The storm that had rolled in the night before left the morning air sharp enough to sting. Wind skimmed across the lake in thin, choppy ribbons, rattling the metal latch on my screen door and shaking the orange survey flags until they fluttered like warnings. I tried focusing on work, on chores, on anything normal, but the feeling wouldn't leave. The sense that I was being maneuvered off my own land one paper cut at a time. By noon, with the wind still needling at my nerves, I gave up pretending I could ignore it. There were answers here, buried somewhere in this house. Dad used to say that the Calder family never did anything without a reason, especially when it came to the lake. If Marcy wanted me off this property so badly, there had to be something she feared I'd uncover. So I went where Dad always stored the things he considered too important, or too dangerous, to leave upstairs. The basement. The steps creaked under my weight as I descended into shadows, thick with dust and cedar-scented chill. There were shelves lined with old paint cans, fishing gear, toolboxes, and jars filled with nails from decades of projects. But my attention went straight to the far corner, where a heavy trunk sat beneath a tarp, untouched since the day I returned to Montana. Dad's trunk. I knelt beside it, pulling the tarp away, coughing as dust spiraled into the air. The trunk itself was old, dark wood worn smooth at the edges, brass corners dented from long use. A small lock hung from the latch, rusted but intact. I remembered the key. I'd found it months ago in Dad's desk, kept it without thinking. I slid it in, turned, listened to the click echo across the basement walls, like the unlocking of a long-buried secret. The trunk opened with a groan, releasing a wave of cold, stale air and an unmistakable scent. Old paper. The kind that had been stored so long it held the memory of every season it had survived. Inside were bundles of documents wrapped in string, ledger books, faded envelopes, survey notes in Dad's handwriting. And at the bottom, lying beneath an oilcloth like a relic from another century, was something that instantly made my hands shake. A rolled, yellowed packet tied with twine. The oilcloth peeled back easily. Beneath it, the edges of old parchment glowed faintly in the dim basement light. I unrolled the first sheet carefully, so carefully it felt like handling a delicate leaf. And there it was. A water rights grant dated June 12, 1924. Transfer of lakebed and shoreline boundaries to the Calder family in perpetuity. My heart thumped once hard. The next pages were hand-drawn maps, ink faded but still sharp enough to follow. They showed the lake as it existed nearly a century ago, before the HOA, before lakeside developments, before any of this trouble. And right there, outlined in neat black ink, was a bold line marking property ownership. The Calder boundary. And it extended far beyond where my father's dock stood today. Across the rocky sandbar, across a stretch of shoreline the HOA now called Common Beach, and into waters the HOA claimed as theirs. Half their lakefront common space was technically mine, and had been for almost 100 years. I swallowed, hands trembling as I traced the ink line with my finger. The air in the basement felt heavier now, charged with the weight of generations. Dad had never spoken about this, but he'd kept it safe. He knew it mattered. In the dim light, I noticed something else. A note pinned to the last page in Dad's handwriting, shaky but determined. If they ever come for the lake, show them what's ours. A cold wave rolled up my spine. My father had known. He'd seen this coming. Above me, the wind slammed against the house, rattling the foundation. I rose slowly, the old documents clutched in one hand. Each step up from that basement felt like a climb toward daylight and clarity. When I emerged onto the porch, I unfolded the main grant document again, letting it flutter in the cold wind. Sunlight struck its aged surface, lighting sections gold. I looked down the shoreline, past the orange flags stabbing into my land, past the trees Marcy wanted removed, past the quiet lake that had carried my family's name in silence for decades. This wasn't about compliance. This wasn't about aesthetics. This wasn't even about power. It was about land. Land worth millions. Land the HOA desperately needed. Land I unknowingly owned. I exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that felt like the first breath of a new fight. If this document was real, and everything about it said it was, then the HOA had no authority here. None. But the question struck me almost instantly, sharp enough to cut through the moment's triumph. If the Calders owned this lakebed outright, why was the HOA acting as if they did? What did they think I wouldn't uncover? A soft crunch of footsteps on gravel snapped my attention to the road. A neighbor walked by, eyes darting toward me before quickly looking away. Rumors were still swirling. The survey flags fluttered in the wind. The violation slips cluttered the porch table like red warnings. I watched the lake. I watched the empty road. I felt the weight of the documents in my hands. And I knew one thing. Marcy Thornwell did not want me holding this, which meant she'd be back. And the next move wouldn't be subtle. The storm clouds from yesterday had broken apart by morning, leaving behind a sharp, brittle cold that settled over the valley like a second skin. Frost clung to the pine needles, the kind that sparkles under sunlight, but crunches under a boot heel, the kind that tells you winter isn't far. I stepped outside with the 1924 water rights grant tucked safely inside a weatherproof folder. The air was so still it felt staged. Even the lake was unusually quiet. The usual rolling breeze replaced by a watchful calm. The kind of quiet that happens before a breaking point. I didn't have to wait long. A sheriff's cruiser rolled around the bend, tires crunching over the frost, sunlight glinting off the windshield. Not fast, not loud, just a slow, deliberate approach that told me this wasn't a social call. Deputy Cole Maddox stepped out, hat pulled low, breath fogging as he closed the door behind him. He didn't walk with the same stiff, directive posture as before. Now he looked uncomfortable, like the badge on his chest carried a weight he hadn't asked for. "Evan," he greeted, voice low. I nodded. "Morning, Deputy." His jaw worked side to side before he spoke again. "Need to talk. Mind if I step up?" He motioned to the porch. I shrugged. "You're already here." He climbed the steps, boots leaving small wet spots where frost melted beneath them. He looked at the lake first, then at the survey flags, then at me. "They're pushing hard," he finally said. "Real hard." "Yeah," I answered. "I noticed." He shifted uncomfortably. "Last night I got a call from Judge Holloran's clerk. HOA filed an emergency injunction. They're claiming your house is a safety hazard to the community." I stared at him. "A safety hazard?" "That's the claim," he said, citing structural instability, shoreline erosion, non-compliant utilities, and, he hesitated, unauthorized occupancy. The phrase made my chest tight. I swallowed the bitter taste. Unauthorized occupancy of my own home. Maddox rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, I'm telling you this because I don't like how fast they're moving. Holloran is connected, plays golf with the HOA board, attends their little fundraisers. Marcy's got pull with half the county officials whether she deserves it or not. So the judge is already leaning her way," I said quietly. "Let's just say," he muttered, "your hearing's on Monday. They're trying to fast-track orders to force you off the property until compliance can be reviewed. 3 days. 3 days before a judge could decide whether I was allowed to stand on my own family's land." "They'll send us to serve the papers soon," Maddox added, lowering his voice. "Probably tomorrow morning. They want a show. They want the neighbors to see you forced out." My fists clenched. The wind picked up a bit, colder than before, carrying a faint metallic tang off the lake. "Why?" I asked. "Why is she pushing so hard? This binder wasn't just a set of rules. It was an agenda." Maddox looked around as if expecting someone to be listening. Off the record, Evan? Off the badge? I nodded. She wants this land, not just your house. The stretch behind your dock, the flat area, they've been talking about a luxury marina plan for 2 years. Couldn't get the zoning, couldn't get the lake rights. Too expensive to buy from the county. It's not county land, I said quietly. It's Calder land. His eyes snapped back to mine. What did you say? I walked inside, then returned with the weatherproof folder. I handed it to him without a word. Maddox opened it and scanned the top page. His brows pulled together. He flipped to the second page, then the third. His breathing slowed. You've got to be kidding me, he whispered. It's real, I said. Dad kept it hidden for a reason. He shook his head, still staring at the century-old document. If this holds up, the HOA can't touch you. They can't touch the lake. They can't touch anything. Exactly. He exhaled sharply, the breath fogging in the cold air. Marcy can't know you've got this. If she did, she'd panic, I finished. Worse, Maddox said. She'd make a mistake, a big one. He closed the folder and handed it back. Keep this locked up. Make copies, digital and physical. Already did. He nodded approvingly. Good. Because Evan, I've seen people lose their homes to Marcy's tactics. She's not just a rule enforcer. She's a strategist, and she'll go after you with everything she has. The wind pressed against the porch siding with a long groan. What do I do until the hearing? I asked. He looked down the road, toward the HOA neighborhood, where rows of houses sat in tidy lines beneath identical roofs. Document everything, he said. Every violation slip, every survey flag, every word she says. And Evan, don't leave the property. If they catch you off-site, they'll twist it as abandonment. I nodded, jaw set. He stepped back toward the cruiser. One more thing. Be ready. They'll make another move before the hearing. Something bigger than survey crews or violation slips. What kind of move, Tassel? I asked. He hesitated again, that flicker of fear crossing his face. The kind that tells you this isn't about rules anymore, he said. It's about taking your land. He tipped his hat, climbed back into his cruiser, and drove away, the gravel crackling beneath his tires, until the sound faded into the cold air. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the documents in my hands, the lake behind me, the flagged shoreline ahead of me. Marcy didn't know about the 1924 water rights grant, but she knew something else, something she thought would force me out before Monday. And as the wind shifted, blowing harder off the lake, a shiver crawled across my skin. Whatever she was planning next wouldn't be small, and it wouldn't be legal. The lake was ink black that night, still as glass under the winter sky. Clouds hung low enough to touch the treetops, blotting out moonlight and turning the shoreline into a single long shadow. I'd stayed up later than usual, tension settling into my shoulders like weight. Maddox's warning replayed in my head with every creak of the old cabin walls. Around 2:14 a.m., the house flickered. A soft hum cut out. Then the lights died completely. Silence rolled through the cabin, thick, instant, unnatural. The heater stalled. The refrigerator clicked off. Even the faint buzz of the outside flood lamp disappeared. For a moment, the darkness felt alive. I stood in the center of the room, letting my eyes adjust. Then, out of habit more than anything, I grabbed the flashlight I kept on the kitchen counter and clicked it on. A thin, white beam carved through the dark. Power outages weren't unheard of along the lake, especially during storms. But tonight, the air was bone dry, the sky empty, the wind barely whispering. This didn't feel like the grid failing. This felt intentional. I walked to the window overlooking the shoreline. The flashlight beam reflected off fresh frost along the dock, and something else. A figure, silhouetted near the fence line. Small, stiff posture. Hair pulled into a tight shape that caught the faint reflection of the lake. Marcy Thornwell, standing at my gate. At 2 a.m. And she wasn't alone. A tow truck idled beside her, engine rattling in the cold, amber hazard lights casting long, broken streaks across the gravel. The driver leaned on the control arm, looking unsure, his breath fogging in the cold night air. I stepped outside without grabbing a coat. The cold hit me like a slap, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The gravel under my boots crunched sharp, each step echoing across the silent lake. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, voice steady. Marcy turned toward me with a smile that didn't fit the darkness around her. Too bright, too confident, too rehearsed. "Mr. Calder," she said, "you're awake." "You cut my power," I said. I didn't phrase it as a question. She gestured toward the tow truck as if I hadn't spoken. "Your boat is in violation of HOA regulation. It must be removed immediately for safety reasons. Failure to comply results in automatic impoundment." "It's 2 a.m. "And?" She shrugged lightly. "Deadlines don't disappear after dark." The tow truck driver shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I don't usually do these kinds of calls." "Do your job," she snapped. I raised my phone. "Just to be clear," I said, tapping the record button, "you're towing my boat from my property in the middle of the night?" Her smile faltered. "Put that phone away. You don't have the right to record HOA enforcement." "Actually," I said calmly, "on private property, I have every right." The driver straightened abruptly. "Hold up," he said, glancing between us. "Private property? Ma'am, you told me this was HOA land." Her expression tightened. "It is HOA land. This entire shoreline is under our authority. The structure he calls a boathouse is a non-compliant hazard, and the watercraft is unauthorized." I held up the phone, recording her every word. "You're standing on Calder land," I said softly, "and you don't have the authority to be here." The driver stepped back from the control arm. "Yeah, I'm not touching this," he muttered. "I'm not getting dragged into a property dispute." "You're being paid," Marcy insisted. "This is a simple enforcement action. Hook the boat." "Ma'am, if this is his land, I could lose my license for trespass towing." "You're indemnified," she snapped. "The HOA takes full legal responsibility." "Then put it in writing," the driver said, crossing his arms. "Right now, on paper, with your signature. If you think I'm hooking up to someone's boat without proof, you're crazy." Her lips curled. "Don't be dramatic." That was the moment she noticed the severed main line. It lay near her feet, neatly cut, cleaner than anything a storm could have done. When my flashlight beam hit the exposed copper, her face twitched just for a second. "You did that," I said quietly. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice to a poisonous whisper. "If you'd complied earlier, none of this would be necessary. The HOA will have this property condemned by morning, and once you're removed—" "Removed?" I echoed. "By who, you? A midnight tow truck?" She bristled. "By the court, by law. This land is too valuable to waste on someone who refuses to follow community standards." The tow truck driver backed away, palms raised. "I'm out. This sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen." "You will tow that boat," she shouted after him as he climbed into his truck. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Not tonight." He pulled away, tires spitting gravel, leaving us in a cloud of dust and silence. Marcy turned on me slowly, her breath visible in the cold air, eyes glowing with something far more dangerous than anger. Certainty. "You think this scares me?" she hissed. "You think a little recording changes anything? By Monday, the judge will have you off this land so fast, you won't know which direction the lake is." "And you cut my power," I said, still recording. "Do you know how illegal that is?" She sneered. "Prove it." I angled the phone toward the cut wire. Already did. She froze. Then she spun on her heel, marched back to her SUV, and slammed the door. Her headlights cut through the darkness as she floored it, fishtailing slightly on the frost-slick gravel. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I looked at the torn fence, the severed power line, the empty shoreline, and I realized that tonight wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. If Marcy Thornwell couldn't scare me off, she'd break the rules to push me off. But she didn't know what documents I had. She didn't know who she was dealing with. And after tonight, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. By sunrise, the frost on the dock had melted into thin ribbons that glistened under the pale morning light. The lake was calm again, eerily calm, like it was holding its breath for what came next. I stood on the porch with the 1924 water rights packet tucked under my arm, thinking through every angle, every detail, every move Marcy had made. She wasn't going to stop. But neither was I. My first call of the morning was to a name Maddox had given me weeks earlier, someone he said didn't flinch when facing county corruption, someone who specialized in real estate disputes and land rights battles across Montana, a lawyer with a reputation for being calm, surgical, and quietly devastating in the courtroom. Riley Hanover. Her voice answered on the second ring, measured, alert, like she'd been awake for hours. "This is Hanover." "Ms. Hanover," I said. "My name is Evan Calder. I was referred by Deputy Maddox." There was a brief pause. "He only refers clients when it's serious," she said. "Tell me what's going on." I gave her the short version. The midnight towing attempt. The cut power line. The HOA trying to evict me from property my family had owned since before the highway was paved. The emergency injunction. The violation slips. The 1924 water rights grant. There was silence on the line for a long, loaded moment. "Evan," she said finally, "I need to see those documents. Today. I can bring them to your office." "Better if I come to you," she said. "If what you're describing is accurate, you shouldn't risk being off the property before your hearing. HOA attorneys are known to twist that." A chill went up my spine. "How soon can you get here?" "An hour?" The call ended, and something in me unclenched for the first time in days. When she pulled up, her arrival was the opposite of Marcy's theatrical grand entrances. No polished SUV, no entourage. Just a dark green pickup truck, well-worn but well-kept, tires crunching over the gravel without hurry or spectacle. She climbed out with a leather satchel over her shoulder, wearing a charcoal coat and boots that had seen more courtrooms than fields. "Mr. Calder?" she asked as she approached the porch. "Evan," I corrected. "Thank you for coming." She nodded once, assessing the property with a quick, practiced glance. The violations taped to my door, the survey flags in the yard, the cut power line still draped like a torn limb. Then she stepped inside and we spread the documents across my kitchen table. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows, catching on the old parchment edges like they were built from gold leaf. Riley slipped on her glasses and studied the grant for a long time without speaking. I watched her expression shift steadily, from interest to focus to the faintest flicker of something sharper. She looked up. "Evan," she said quietly, "this isn't just strong. This is definitive. The Calder family didn't just own part of the lake. They owned, and still own, the entire shoreline boundary. The HOA has no jurisdiction here. None." I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "What about the common beach?" I asked. "Yours," she said. "The boat launch they built 5 years ago? On your land. The community dock they put up last summer?" She tapped the map. "Right here, squarely within the Calder survey lines." My heart thudded once, a heavy, grounding sound. She leaned back, folding her arms. The HOA has been illegally asserting authority over land they never owned, never leased, and had no right to manage. And based on the harassment you've described, they're acting like they know you're close to uncovering something. They are, I said. But why now? Why push so aggressively? She slid another document across the table, something she had pulled from her satchel earlier. Because of this. It was a planning map, a set of architectural renderings, a high-end marina proposal stamped Lakeshore Premier Villas Development, Phase 1. My stomach tightened. Where did you get this? Public record, she said. Filed 3 months ago. Denied by the county due to water rights ambiguity and shoreline ownership concerns. The HOA argued they controlled the land. But they don't, I said. Correct. And they knew a rightful owner might surface. Someone like you. The realization hit hard. They're trying to clear me out before Monday. Exactly. She began collecting the documents, organizing them with deliberate care. We need evidence of harassment, unauthorized entry, and attempted forced removal. Do you have recordings? I nodded. Everything since they first flagged the shoreline. Good. We'll use all of it. She stood, the morning light turning her glasses opaque. Evan, this won't just stop their injunction. If we handle this right, we can dismantle their authority entirely. Her confidence washed through me like warm air. What do you need me to do? I asked. Stay calm. Stay here. Document everything. And do not, under any circumstances, confront them directly. I haven't. That's good, because if they escalate, and they will, we need them to do it on camera. She walked to the porch, surveying the lake again, her coat fluttering in the breeze. This land carries history, she murmured. Your family protected it for generations. Now it's your turn. She turned back to me. I'll see you at the courthouse Monday morning. And Evan? Yeah? She gave a small, rare smile. Don't worry. The HOA has no idea what's coming. As she drove away, her taillights disappearing into the sunlit mist, I stood on the porch with the evidence held tight against my chest. For the first time since this war began, I didn't feel like I was defending my land alone. I had a weapon now, a silent one, a legal one, and for the first time, the lake didn't feel threatened. It felt ready. Monday arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning where the sky looked like hammered steel and every breath hung in the air like smoke. I stood on the dock before leaving, letting the lake settle my nerves. The water was still, heavy with a quiet weight that reminded me of Dad. Unmoving, steady, unshakable. At 8:10 a.m., Riley's truck pulled up my gravel drive. She stepped out with the same calm precision she'd shown at our first meeting, her satchel slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. This time, her expression carried something sharper. Not anticipation, confidence. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. We drove toward the county courthouse with the wind pressing against the truck windows, making the evergreens sway in long, sweeping arcs. Every mile closer raised my pulse, but Riley looked unaffected, tapping her fingers lightly on the folder resting on her lap. Remember, she said, speak only when asked. Keep your composure. Let their theatrics burn themselves out. Their theatrics? You'll see, she replied with a soft exhale. HOA counsel tends to dress up a lie with a lot of expensive vocabulary. The courthouse rose out of the mist, like an old sandstone ship, its steps slick from the cold morning drizzle. People were already gathering on the steps, some I recognized as neighbors, others from the HOA board itself, and right in the center of it all stood Marcy Thornwell, in her navy suit, the HOA pin gleaming like it had been polished just for the occasion. She saw me, and smiled. A smug, satisfied smile. the kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. Inside, the courtroom was fuller than I expected. Residents whispered in tight clusters, some glancing my way with pity, others with barely concealed curiosity. The air smelled faintly of old books and damp coats, the kind of smell that clings to government buildings in small towns. Riley guided me to the table on the right. She moved with silent efficiency, laying out documents, setting up copies, pulling up timestamps on her laptop. Across the aisle, the HOA attorney, an overly groomed man named Daniel Kellerman, rifled through his stack of papers with theatrical energy, as if performing for an audience. Judge Holleran entered, older, silver hair combed back, a demeanor that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. He glanced at the room, then at the docket. Case number 24371, Lakeshore HOA versus Calder, he said. Emergency injunction hearing. Kellerman stood instantly. Your Honor, he began. My clients, the Lakeshore Homeowners Association, seek immediate removal of Mr. Calder from the unsafe, non-compliant structure he is currently occupying. His property presents significant hazards to the surrounding community, violates shoreline regulations, and jeopardizes both safety and property values. He clicked a remote. A projector flashed images on the wall. Photos of my dock taken at unflattering angles, close-ups of water-stained boards, pictures of the marked trees, the survey flags, even a shot of my truck parked slightly crooked in the driveway. Furthermore, Kellerman continued, Mr. Calder has shown a disregard for cooperative community standards, refused HOA inspections, and created a hostile environment for residents. Whispers rippled across the courtroom. Riley didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. When Kellerman finished, he sat with the kind of smug air that said he believed his showmanship had carried the day. The judge turned to Riley. Ms. Hanover, your response? Riley stood slowly, smoothing her coat with one hand, her composure the perfect counterpoint to Kellerman's theatrics. Your Honor, she said, voice even, before I address these allegations, I need to enter into evidence a series of documents that redefine the context of this entire case. She handed a thick folder to the bailiff, who delivered copies to the judge and opposing counsel. These, she said, are the original water rights documents and shoreline ownership grants for the Calder property, dated 1924, authenticated, notarized, and maintained through subsequent county records. These documents show that the Calder family does not occupy HOA-controlled land. They own the lakebed, shoreline, and surrounding boundaries, in full, and have since before the HOA development existed. The courtroom went silent. Dead silent. Kellerman blinked, stunned. Marcy stiffened. Riley continued. Furthermore, the HOA's actions, issuing violations, trespassing with survey crews, cutting utility lines, attempting a midnight seizure of private property, constitute harassment and illegal encroachment on private land. A murmur spread across the room. She clicked her own remote. Videos played. Footage of the survey crew trespassing. The orange flags. The tow truck at 2 a.m. Marcy ordering the seizure. The severed power line. Each clip landed like a hammer. Kellerman shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is completely outside. Sit, Holleran snapped. He sat. Riley continued calmly. In addition, Exhibit D shows the HOA has filed plans for a luxury marina on what they claim is community shoreline. Those plans are not only misleading, they're illegal. The land in question has never belonged to the HOA. It belongs to the Calder estate. Riley paused. Her next words sliced through the courtroom like cold steel. The HOA has knowingly operated under false jurisdiction. Gasps, whispers, a stifled curse from somewhere in the back. Marcy stood abruptly. This is absurd. These documents are outdated. They can't— Ms. Thornwell, the judge warned. You'll wait your turn. She sat, hands trembling. Judge Holleran flipped through the documents with growing concern, his eyebrows knitting deeper. This is quite serious, he murmured. Kellerman leaned forward urgently. Your Honor, these claims need verification. You filed for an emergency ruling, the judge said sharply. If you wanted more time to prepare, you should not have weaponized the expedited hearing process. The courtroom froze. The judge looked directly at me. Mr. Calder, he said, until I review the validity of these documents, no enforcement action may be taken against you. Relief washed through me, but it wasn't victory yet. The room held its breath as Holleran closed the folder, face pale. We will recess for 15 minutes, he said. But the way he stood, the stiffness in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes, told me this wouldn't be a simple recess. Something about the Calder documents rattled him, deeply, and as the judge disappeared into his chambers, the courtroom buzzed with shock. The tide had shifted. For the first time, Marcy wasn't smiling. When Judge Holleran returned from recess, the entire courtroom seemed to lean forward as one. The air had changed, thicker, heavier, holding the kind of tension that settles in the rafters before a thunderstorm. Even the lights seemed dimmer, as if they, too, sensed something had broken loose behind the judge's closed door. Holleran's face told the story before he spoke. He looked pale beneath the courtroom fluorescence, eyes narrowed with the weight of something he couldn't easily dismiss. He carried the folder of Calder documents with both hands, as if its contents were fragile, but also dangerous. He cleared his throat. Be seated. Everyone obeyed in a wave of shifting wood and rustling coats. The judge adjusted his glasses, gazed down at the papers, then slowly looked up. These documents are legitimate, he said. You could have heard a pine needle drop. The 1924 water rights grant is authenticated through county records, he continued. The survey maps align with historical land use filings, and the Calder family's ownership of the lakebed and shoreline predates the creation of the Lakeshore HOA by nearly 70 years. A whisper rippled across the courtroom. Shock, disbelief, maybe even a little fear. Riley stood, calm as stone. Judge Holleran's gaze slid toward the HOA side, stopping squarely on Marcy Thornwell. Mrs. Thornwell, can you provide documentation showing the HOA's authority supersedes or nullifies these rights? Marcy rose too quickly. Her voice trembled. Your Honor, these claims are being blown out of proportion. Those documents are ancient, irrelevant to modern governance. Our bylaws clearly outline that. Your bylaws, Holleran interrupted, do not override historical land ownership. Her cheeks flushed a deep red. But the HOA has managed this shoreline for decades. These documents are... they're technicalities. Land rights, Holleran said sharply, are not technicalities. Kellerman leaped up as if trying to salvage the moment. Your Honor, I insist we file motions to delay. This is procedural ambush. You filed for an emergency injunction, the judge snapped. You don't get to demand delays now that the facts aren't in your favor. The lawyer sat down slowly. Marcy didn't. Her breathing became shallow, jaw tight, and I could see the moment reality cracked through her armor. Her fingers dug into the table edge hard enough to whiten her knuckles. Judge Holleran continued. Furthermore, the evidence presented by Mr. Calder, including recorded incidents of harassment, unauthorized entry, and attempts to seize property, raises serious legal concerns. He turned another page. But there is something else. He set the folder down, folded his hands. I reviewed county planning files during recess. The HOA recently attempted to file a redevelopment plan for a large-scale marina project. Gasps spread through the room like sparks catching dry brush. Holleran nodded. A project that relies on land and water access they do not own. All eyes snapped to Marcy. Her mask finally cracked. She stood again, shaking her head wildly. This is nonsense. That land is community property. It always has been. The HOA has managed it. She stopped abruptly, because Kellerman grabbed her sleeve in panic. "Sit," he whispered, but she yanked free. Her composure shattered as she turned toward the courtroom, voice rising. "You people don't understand what's at stake. We were building something beautiful for this community. A marina would raise home values, bring in investors, create a legacy. And now one stubborn man with a rotting dock thinks he can stop progress?" The judge slammed his gavel. "Mrs. Thornwell!" She ignored him, pointing at me with trembling fury. "He doesn't care about this neighborhood. He doesn't care about anyone. He's just hiding behind dusty papers because—" "Mrs. Thornwell!" Holloran's voice boomed through the chamber. "You are out of order!" But she wasn't finished. Her voice sharpened into a kind of desperate, unhinged confession. "He was never supposed to get those documents," she shouted. "We knew his father kept files. We knew something existed that could ruin everything. We just had to move before he found it." Dead silence. Even her own lawyer stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Riley leaned toward me, whispering, "She just admitted premeditated harassment on the record." Holloran's face hardened. "Mrs. Thornwell, did you or the HOA board knowingly attempt to force Mr. Calder from his property?" Marcy's eyes darted wildly. I decline to answer." "You're refusing under oath?" "I plead the fifth." Her voice shook. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Pleading the fifth in a civil case was almost always a nail in the coffin. Holloran leaned back slowly. "Then I have no choice." He turned to the clerk. "Record Mrs. Thornwell's refusal. It will be entered as adverse inference." Marcy dropped into her seat like the ground had given out beneath her. The judge took a long breath before delivering the next blow. "Effective immediately, the emergency injunction against Mr. Calder is denied." He flipped another page. "All HOA citations and fines against the Calder property are voided." Another page. "And the HOA must produce a full accounting of all shoreline-related expenditures, development plans, and internal communications for the past 5 years." He paused, looking directly at the HOA table. "And this court is referring the matter to the county attorney for investigation into potential fraud, extortion, and misuse of authority." The room erupted in whispers, shock rolling through the benches like a tidal wave. Marcy looked at me with raw hatred. But beneath it, fear. A real, primal fear. For the first time, she understood she wasn't the predator. She was the prey. Riley closed her folder gently, her expression unreadable. "It's over," she whispered. "Not yet," I said, because something in Marcy's eyes told me she had one move left, a desperate move, and she was about to make it. The courtroom hadn't even fully settled from the judge's ruling when Marcy Thornwell lurched to her feet again, eyes blazing. Not with confidence, but with the cornered panic of someone watching their empire collapse plank by plank. "This is corruption!" she shrieked. "You're all blind if you think those papers mean anything. I've kept this community together for 15 years. Without me, Lakeshore will fall apart." Judge Holloran's face drained of all remaining patience. "Mrs. Thornwell, I strongly advise you to. You know this isn't fair," she raged, pointing a trembling finger toward the bench. "You and I both know we've served on committees. We've attended the same galas. Don't you dare act like you haven't profited from—" "Bailiff!" Holloran's voice cut through the room like a sharp current. The bailiff stepped forward just as gasps rippled across the benches. In one reckless moment, Marcy had done the one thing no one expected. She exposed her own connections, her own manipulation, her own belief that she could intimidate a judge in open court. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. The bailiff stood beside her. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." Marcy froze, not because she intended to obey, but because she finally realized she'd crossed a threshold even she couldn't step back from. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, a sympathetic face, a single HOA member willing to stand with her. None did. Even the most loyal ones stared at the floor, their silence a quiet verdict. Slowly, she sank into her chair. Defeated. Alone. Judge Holleran adjusted his glasses, visibly shaken, but regaining control. "Mrs. Thornwell," he said, "this court orders you to refrain from any further contact with Mr. Calder, pending the county's investigation. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." She stared ahead, lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Calder, you are restored to full, uncontested possession of your property. You are also entitled to pursue damages if you choose." I nodded, not out of triumph, but relief. A deep, bone-level relief that made my shoulders sag, as if I had finally put down a load I'd been carrying for years without knowing it. When the judge dismissed the court, the room erupted in murmurs. People flooded the aisles. Some avoided Marcy like she was radioactive. Others glanced at me with new eyes, curious, apologetic, even grateful. Riley closed her folder and gave me a small, satisfied smile. "Told you," she said. "They had no idea what was coming." We stepped out into the cold. The drizzle had stopped, leaving the air crisp enough to sting the lungs. Reporters had gathered outside despite this being a small county. Microphones angled toward me, cameras blinking red. "Mr. Calder, do you now control the entire lake? Will the HOA be dissolved? What legal action will you take next? Are residents in danger of losing their homes? What do you plan to do with the shoreline?" I raised my hands gently. "Folks, calm down. I'm not here to evict anybody. I'm not here to take anything." My grandfather and father believed this lake was meant to be shared by neighbors, not controlled by fear. That's all I want too. Riley stepped forward. "We'll be issuing a statement later. For now, please respect Mr. Calder's privacy." We broke away and walked toward her truck. Deputy Maddox approached, hat in hand. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. "Evan," he said, "I owe you an apology. I should have looked deeper before responding to those calls." I shook his hand firmly. "You did your job. Now we're both doing the right thing." He nodded, relieved. "If you need anything at all, you call me." When Riley and I reached her truck, she stopped and faced me. "This is your turning point. What you do next sets the tone for the whole community." "I know," I replied, "and I want to do right by it." She smiled. "Then let's get started." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Attorneys, county meetings, stunned residents trying to understand how the HOA they depended on had actually been operating on false authority for decades. The county's investigation into Marcy moved quickly after her own courtroom meltdown. Financial records, emails, meeting minutes, all of it painted a picture of a long-running scheme fueled by ego, greed, and manipulation. The district attorney charged her with fraud, extortion, and abuse of authority. But I wasn't focused on revenge. I was focused on rebuilding what she'd broken. The old HOA board dissolved almost immediately. Several members came to me privately, apologizing for being misled, intimidated, or bullied. Some cried. Many had believed they were following legitimate rules, only to realize they'd been pawns in Marcy's empire. I didn't hold grudges. This lake had enough scars. In Marcy's absence, the community slowly began to knit itself back together. Neighbors once too afraid to speak waved at me again. People started walking dogs by the shoreline without fear of violations. Kids played near the water without someone timing how long they laughed. But I wanted something bigger, something lasting, something that honored the Calder legacy and prevented any future HOA, or anyone else, from ever abusing this lake again. So I created the Lake Stewardship Trust, a nonprofit that preserved the shoreline, ensured public access, and guaranteed that the land would remain protected forever. Not sold, not developed, not exploited. The house at the end of the lake, the one I had feared losing, became the stewardship office. Riley joined as legal advisor. Maddox helped liaise with the county. Volunteers lined up to clean trails, repair docks, and restore the natural beauty that had been neglected under the HOA's iron-fisted rule. And slowly, day by day, the lake breathed again. One crisp morning, months later, I walked down to the dock with a mug of coffee. Mist rolled off the surface in long silver veils. The pines whispered overhead. The boards creaked under my boots, familiar and steady. I stood at the water's edge and let the quiet settle around me. The lake wasn't just calm, it felt whole again. Behind me, footsteps crunched lightly. Riley approached, hands in her coat pockets. "Thought I'd find you here," she said. "Old habits," I replied. She looked out over the water. "You did good, Evan. Better than I expected." "Thanks," I said, smiling. She nudged my shoulder. "Ready for the next meeting?" "Always." As we headed back toward the house, I glanced one last time at the lake, the morning sun catching on its surface like scattered gold. My father's words floated back to me. If they ever come for the lake, show them what's ours. I had. And the lake was home again. The HOA had called 911 to remove me from my own property, but they didn't know my power. And they never would again. If you've ever stood your ground against folks who thought they could take what's yours, drop a justice in the comments so I know you're out there. And if you want more tales about fighting back the right way, with truth, patience, and the paperwork that never lies, go on and subscribe. I'll be here with the next story by the water.